Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady and today I want to let you all know about the Warhammer 40k big FAQ that was released earlier this morning. So for those of you who are new to the game, or maybe you just don't really keep up to date with the game and its changes, the tabletop game of Warhammer 40k has 3 big updates every year that slightly change the way the game is played, and they also attempt to balance the game as much as possible. Out of those 3 big updates each year, 2 of them are called big FAQs, and these are essentially a mix of rules changes and rules clarifications for the main rules of the game, and some changes and clarifications to individual army rules and their units. These updates are released in April and September each year and are available online for free. The third update is called Chapter Approved, which is a book that you purchase that includes mostly points adjustments for units in the game that need it, whether it be decreasing their points to make them more viable or increasing their points to make them less powerful. And sometimes there are rule changes or updates in Chapter Approved as well. These 3 updates are pretty much the balance patches for Warhammer 40k to try and keep the game fresh, but more importantly, to attempt to keep the game as balanced and fair as possible. So now that you know what these updates are, let's go over the changes from this month's big FAQ. There's been a lot of speculation about what Games Workshop will change this time around, so let's just jump right into it and talk about the changes. So first off, I will go over the big changes to the game itself, and then following that segment, I will go over all of the individual changes and clarifications that each army has received. And then after that, I will go over the minor core rule updates and clarifications. So normally for a big FAQ, Games Workshop releases a document consisting of all of the biggest changes in the game in one convenient place. And alongside that document, they update all of the army's current FAQs that are currently on the website. This time around though, the main document for this FAQ is just some designer's commentary about the game, but let's go over it really quickly and I'll give some thoughts on it. So here it is, and here is a little snippet about one of the people that helped write these rules, and I'm just going to skip over that part. This is all we really need to see. So for the FAQs and ERRATA updates, as with previous updates, the first thing we have done is to update all of our existing FAQ and ERRATA documents to take account for any new questions that have been asked since April. If you submitted a question, make sure you check out the ERRATA and FAQ document for your Army's Codex. There are no major changes to any of these core Warhammer 40k rules, only some clarifications, such as the ordering of opposed dice rolls and rerolls. You can find these in the updated Warhammer 40k FAQ document. Matchplay rules. We are not releasing any new beta matchplay rules as part of this update, and all previously finalized matchplay rules will continue to apply as they did before. Balance updates. We are not introducing any balance changes at this time. All the feedback we have received regarding the relative effectiveness of one unit over another will be incorporated and represented in the next points review, which will be released alongside Chapter Approved 2019 in the near future. So as you can see, they didn't really update anything too big this time around because they feel like the game's core rules are in a good place currently when it comes to balance. With that said, is the game as a whole perfectly balanced? Hell no, Grey Knights are still crying in a corner. But fixing armies like Grey Knights can't really be done with an FAQ or changing core rules of the game, because changing how the fly keyword works, or changing how armies are allowed to farm command points, or changing how the shooting phase works doesn't really fix that army or other armies' problems. The type of fix that Grey Knights and possibly some other armies need will come from updated codexes or new supplements like Vigilus Defiant or the new Psychic Awakening stuff that is just around the corner. Or possibly even points adjustments in Chapter Approved, which is due in a couple of months. So if you're upset that there aren't any big changes this FAQ and that your low tier army is still low tier, I'd actually say to be happy that there wasn't any big changes in this FAQ, because that probably means that Games Workshop has the rules teams working on updates for the armies that need it, instead of wasting time trying to rebalance the core rules of the game, which are working perfectly fine in my opinion. So, for my overall thoughts on Games Workshop's statement that the game is in a good place right now, or at least the core rules of the game are in a good place right now, I kind of already said it, but I'll say it again. I actually agree with them. I agree that the game is in a great place right now for the most part when it comes to the core rules of the game and how it is played. I don't think anything really needed to be changed when it comes to the main rules of the game. Like I mentioned earlier though, I do think however that some armies are kind of falling behind due to power creep and are in desperate need of some updates of some kind. So hopefully with Psychic Awakening we get those updates, or hopefully those armies get updated codexes soon. And when it comes to the meta overall and the balance of it, I honestly think the meta is fine. Sure, we have an overabundance of Imperial Knights and Orcs and Eldar, but with the new Space Marine stuff that just came out and is still coming out because there's some supplements that are still on the way, and a Sisters of Battle Codex which should be out sometime before the end of the year, and Chapter Approved which is only a couple of months away, I'd say give the meta some time to redevelop before jumping to conclusions and thinking that the meta is going to be the exact same a couple of months down the road. So again, I think we just need to wait and see how things play out before we jump to any conclusions. So now with that said, let's go over all of the changes that actually did take place in this FAQ. Because sure, there weren't any big ones like I stated earlier, but there was a bunch of clarifications and minor rule changes, so let's go over all of those. So first, let's quickly summarize all of the individual army rules changes and clarifications, and then I'll go over all of the minor core rules changes and clarifications and give some thoughts on them. So for a quick summary of the individual army changes and clarifications. For Tau, their drone savior protocol is now clarified on how it works, which to be honest is the way the vast majority of players interpreted that rule anyways. Their automated repair stratagem is now once per turn, and Dayak Grek can use his traps even when in deep strike. For all of the non-vanilla Space Marine chapters, they got some datasheet updates to be closer to ones from the new Codex Space Marine. Add next Castellan robot shields that do mortal wounds to the unit shooting at them, apply to the unit that actually shoots at them. So in the instance when they're being shot at by a unit that's inside of a transport that is shooting out of the transport because of the open top rule, the unit inside the transport suffers the mortal wound. White Scar's units from their supplement, aka the Khans, can only be used in White Scar's army and not in successor chapters. Chaos Space Marine apostles have to be on the battlefield to chant a prayer, so you can't do a prayer while in deep strike. Chaos Space Marines in general also get Hateful Assault, which is the same thing as Shock Assault for Space Marines, except it doesn't apply to cultists. And Fabulous Bill can go on any Legion detachment without breaking that detachment's bonuses. Death Guard and Thousand Suns get the Hateful Assault rule too, except it doesn't go on Poxwalkers or Cultists or Zangors. And for Thousand Suns, their Zangors can no longer take an Instrument of Chaos from the Index, plus the Brayhorn from the Codex, for +2 to their charges and advance rolls. For Inari, their Stratagem in Needs Net only works on Bikers, and Inari Hemlocks generate their powers from the Revenant discipline. For Craft Worlds, they clarified that Wave Serpents reduce the damage of every individual attack by 1. For Vanilla Space Marines, no more endless hits because you rolled 1/6 with an Infiltrator squad. This was obviously never intended, and I honestly don't know why anyone would try to rules lawyer this, but some people are just like that, I guess. For Genestealer Cult, the Keller Morphora only applies to the end of the phase that he actually killed the character in. Also, Genestealer Cult can't deep strike turn 1, and now follow normal match play rules and have to deep strike by turn 3 or they die in reserve. For Chaos Knights, if they are a character, they can use the Demonic Ritual ability and summon in demons. For Ultramarines, like White Scars, all of the units in the supplement can only go in regular Ultramarines and cannot be used in successor chapters. For Vigilus Defiant, some of the formation stuff was removed because it has newer versions in the new Space Marine Codex. And for an overarching change, because I noticed this in quite a few different codexes, all of the stratagems and abilities from multiple codexes that allowed a unit to move outside of the movement phase now can't have you end that move within 1 inch of enemy units. And all Demolisher cannons in the game are now D6 shots instead of D3, so it's not just the new Space Marines that get that change. And there's the summary. Those are all the changes and clarifications that are army specific. Unless I missed one, and knowing me, I probably missed at least 1. Or 2. Might be. But with that out of the way, let's now go over all of the changes and clarifications to the core rules of the game, and I'll give my thoughts on these as well, and then we can finish up the video. General questions. If a rule says that I can do something, for example, when a morale test is taken for this unit, you can re-roll that dice, does that mean that I have to do that thing, or is it optional? If a rule says you can do something, it is entirely up to you to decide if you want to do that thing. For example, if a rule states when resolving an attack made with this weapon, you can re-roll the hit roll. That is permitting the player to do that thing. Compare this to when resolving an attack made with this weapon, re-roll a hit roll of 1. That is an instruction to the player, and that is not optional. So the big thing to notice here is if it says can. If it says you can do it, then it's an option. If it just says re-roll a hit roll, like as if it's a definitive statement, then you have to do what it says. And I think this was actually a given. Like, that's how I've always interpreted it. But again, just like all the other FAQs, they're just trying to clarify things so that there's less arguments over it. Because the thing with Warhammer 40k is a lot of rules are up for interpretation, so sometimes people will get different interpretations and arguments can happen over it. When creating a battle-forged army, if a unit has an ability that means it does not take up a slot in a detachment, such as a Drukhari Lamian in a detachment that also includes an arc— oh my god, I sent them this question. They answered my question. Yes! Okay, so anyways, when creating a battle-forged army, if a unit has an ability that means it does not take up a slot in a detachment, such as a Drukhari Lamian in a detachment that also includes an Archon, can I still include one unit with the dedicated transport battlefield role for each of the units in this detachment? You can include one unit with the dedicated transport battlefield role for each slot in that detachment that has been taken up. Oh, so I was right. So because the Lamian doesn't take up a slot, you cannot include a dedicated transport for it. This is honestly how I've always interpreted it, which is why I've never done this in my own list and why I've even brought it up when reviewing Drukhari lists in my top 10 armies videos. I always figured because it doesn't take up a slot, you cannot bring a dedicated transport for it. So yeah, this makes sense to me. So now it's clear, cut, and dry. The Lamians, if they're in a detachment with an Archon, they don't take up a slot. Therefore, it doesn't unlock a dedicated transport slot. There we go. Can an index unit be equipped with a weapon from a Codex weapon list? So can a Chaos Lord on a bike be equipped with a Thunderhammer not previously available to them? No. That's interesting too, because I've actually seen a couple of lists where people were doing that, but I guess there was never a clear-cut answer to it, or if there was, it was hard to find. Now it's really easy. It's right here. You can't do it. When players roll off, example, as part of Mental Onslaught Psychic Power, when must any rerolls be used? Once the original roll-off has been made, both players must declare whether they wish to re-roll the result of their dice before any rerolls are made. This is huge. I'm so glad they put this in, because what would happen sometimes is you would roll off with somebody. So for an example, let's say me and my opponent are rolling off for something, and he rolls a 3 and I roll a 2, so he wins. So obviously I want to use a command point to re-roll this because maybe it's a big deal and it's going to cause a bunch of stuff that I don't want to happen or something like that. So in the old situation, before this was clarified, I would spend a command point to re-roll my dice, and if it's still a 2 or a 1, then my opponent doesn't really suffer anything. He gets to just keep his result and win. But if I did roll like a 4 higher than him, then it gives my opponent a chance to be like, all right, well now I'm going to use a command point and I'm going to try to outroll your roll. This now makes it like if you get to re-roll, your opponent has to decide, do I want to keep my roll or do I want to try to re-roll as well? There's a little more thinking involved rather than just waiting and reacting. You actually have to think about the odds and stuff and figure if it's going to be worth it to re-roll your result as well, even though you won the original roll-off. So I actually really like this change. I'm glad that they put this in. If I have access to several abilities that allow me to re-roll a single dice, can I use more than one of these dice to affect a roll that includes more than one dice? If so, how is this applied? If you have more than one ability that allows you to reroll a single dice, for example, the Gaze of Fate Psychic Power and the Command Reroll Stratagem, you can use both of these to reroll the same 2d6, 3d6, etc. roll, but must declare any reroll abilities that you wish to use before any dice are rerolled. Note that the individual dice that make up the roll can still only be rerolled once. This is another clarification, because I actually used to do this with my Tzeentch list that I've been playing for fun. The strategy was, use the Gaze of Fate spell so you get a free reroll that turn. Then you go to charge your Zangors that only have a 7-inch charge to make, which is now only an 8-inch charge because the change that they made in the Thousand Suns FAQ. So you would deep strike your Zangors in 9 inches away, they'd have a 7-inch charge, and you'd roll your charge. Or let's say you rolled a 3 and a 3. You would then use your Gaze of Fate reroll to reroll one of the 3s, and if it's a 4 or higher, great. Let's say you rerolled it into a 3 again. Then you would use your command point reroll to reroll the other dice, hoping to get a 4 or higher. But now, if you want to use both those rerolls, you have to do them at the same time. So again, kind of like this other change over here where you're rolling off with your opponent, you have to decide if you actually want to reroll both dice or if you want to reroll one. There's no like double up chances, you know what I mean? So I do like that change. That is pretty good. I like that. In the fight phase rules, under choose target, the third sentence states, this represents the unit fighting in 2 ranks. Does this mean I should only fight in 2 ranks even if I can physically fit more than that, such as with 28mm bases and 32mm bases? Or is this just an abstract description of what the rule does? This was intended to be an illustrative piece of text, creating an image of how models fight further back or would fight. It was not intended to limit the actual number of models that are able to fight. The number of models that can fight is described in the first and second sentence. That's pretty cool. I honestly never thought about this, but I guess there were some people that took that literally as first and second rank were the only ones that could fight. But so that's pretty cool that they clarified this. Is it possible to use a stratagem from one codex to target a unit from another? Unless otherwise specified, yes, so long as the unit in the stratagem being used has the appropriate keywords. Okay, so it stays the same. Note that Codex Chaos Demons, Codex Tyranids, and Codex Space Marines are examples that specify otherwise in the relevant FAQ and errata. So this was done, the Codex Demons or Chaos Demons was done because people were using the Chaos Space Marine or the Chaos Demon stratagems on stuff like Magnus. So you were getting Magnus before they FAQ'd the Warp Surge stratagem to only go up to a 4+, Magnus was having like a 2+ invul, and he was deep striking. So you couldn't shoot him on turn 1 before he super buffed himself, and then after that he'd buff himself up with +1 invul, -1 to hit, and then in the opponent's shooting phase, he'd give himself the Warp Surge stratagem from Chaos Demons for a 2-up invul. It was stupid and ridiculous, so they did need to FAQ that. For Codex Tyranids, it's kind of the same thing, but with Genestealer Cult, you have some keywords in there that bounce between both codexes, so you could do some pretty stupid combos with it. And same thing with Codex Space Marines, they have some pretty good combos that when used on stuff like Death Watch would be kind of insane. So yeah, because of that, they specify that those 3 codexes, their stratagems only work on the stuff in their own books. But for other stuff, like let's say Chaos Space Marines and Thousand Suns, if you bring a detachment of Chaos Space Marines, so like World Eaters, Black Legion, any of the legions from the Chaos Space Marine Codex, and you bring Thousand Suns, and in the Thousand Suns you bring yourself a big blob of cultists, you can actually use the Tide of Traitor stratagem from the Chaos Space Marine book on the cultists from Thousand Suns. Because again, it doesn't specify that that can't be done, and it does specify, unless otherwise specified, yes, so long as the unit and the stratagem is being used has the appropriate keywords. And those units would have the appropriate keywords, so that can still be done. Oh look, and they even say it down here before I could see it. For example, you can use the Titus Trader stratagem from Chaos Space Marines on a unit from Death Guard, blah 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 blah. So yeah, there we go, exactly like how I just said. I should have just read this before I went. Whatever, moving on. Unit and weapon abilities. Some attacks deal mortal wounds in addition to their normal damage. When are these mortal wounds allocated? Any mortal wounds inflicted by an attack in addition to normal damage should be allocated after the attack has been resolved. Note that this may prevent fast rolling when resolving attacks with this ability. If a unit has an ability that allows it to heroically intervene as if it were a character, how is this resolved? Each model in the unit must finish this move closer to the enemy model that was closest to it. If multiple abilities that instruct the player to roll more dice than usual and discard one of them apply to a unit, for example when taking a morale test for a unit of Plague Bearers that is within range of a friendly Sloppity Bilepiper's Disease Mirth ability and within 6 inches of an enemy Harlequin's unit with the Silent Shroud's Dance of Nightmares made flesh from mask form, how is this resolved? You should roll 1 additional dice for each of these abilities and then apply any other effects. In the example above, you would roll 3d6 for the morale test and then discard both the highest and lowest result, leaving 1 remaining dice for the morale test. And as far as I can see, that's all of the new clarifications on the core rules for Warhammer 40k. So that's going to be it for this video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys and gals think about this update, whether you like it, whether you don't, and what things you wish went a little differently. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button before you go and subscribe to the channel for more Warhammer 40k content like this if you haven't already. Also, check me out on Patreon if you want to help support the channel, and thanks to all of my current patrons for being awesome and allowing me to do what I do here on this channel. And thanks to all of you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming.